Hello, I'm Liam Fogarty, and this is Bay TV Liverpool's Budget Special. The Chancellor has spoken. The number crunchers are hard at work trying to make sense of what he said in his budget statement. But what's in it for you and for me, the taxpayers, savers, pensioners and job seekers of our city region? Helping me to pick the bones out of this pre-election budget, I have three guests. Nick Hughes is an accountant with Sloan & Co, based in Liverpool. Laura Brown is a communications expert who runs her own business in Liverpool's Baltic creative area. And James McKenna is Northwest Regional Organiser of the TUC. I'll ask each of you in turn for some general impressions. Nick, you are a number cruncher, an accountant. What's your takeaway from the budget 2015?
Not very spectacular. A little bit underwhelming, especially in an election year. I expected something a little bit tastier than what there is, but much what we expected in lots of other quarters. Though small increase in the personal tax allowance, plus a few bits and bobs. The freeze on petrol duty we kind of thought might be coming. The bigger news was probably yesterday and giving the minimum wage a bit of an increase, but again, unspectacular.
Laura, you've been tweeting on this and I've been following you with interest. You're kind of impressed but not impressed.
I think I was more surprised of how much the budget was kind of written for me and just me alone. I'm a self-employed, working in the creative and digital sector in the north. I own my own house. I have a savings account. I do great. It's just everybody else that doesn't seem to get any benefit from it. So a little bit surprising, possibly.
James, the TUC isn't impressed, to judge by what your General Secretary's been saying. What's your overall take on this budget?
Very similar to what Francis has said today. What isn't in it says an awful lot, certainly about the Chancellor's position on public services or pay for many workers. And I think mine was that it, similar to Nick, it was very unspectacular. There wasn't really much in there that we would, we'd expect people to be shouting home about. A lot of it seems to be in the detail and a bit of a rehash of things that they're already doing. Help to buy, only this time he's merged it with an ISA. Very little there for workers or people who are feeling worse off. Much discussion about people back into work today, but very little about certainly the quality of work or how much people are taking home at the end of each week.
Nick, on a practical basis, the end of the kind of traditional self-assessment form for taxpayers, is the Chancellor doing you out of business?
To a certain degree, possibly with some of the smaller, easier tax returns, but I do think that businesses are a lot more complicated, and business owners are a lot busier than they used to be. They're very empowered now compared to the way it used to be. It was people were always subservient to their accountants, but we live in a much changed society now. People have got their finger on the pulse. They don't just want you to put in a tax return, they want you to put a meaningful spin on their figures. So we won't become completely obsolete, but we'll lose a lot of the simpler jobs, if you like.
For personal taxpayers, the personal allowance is going up yet again. The Lib Dems are claiming credit for that. National insurance, which is a tax nobody really understands, doesn't change at all. What do you say to your clients when they come to you kind of baffled that one tax allowance is increasing and the other's pretty much staying where it is?
Exactly that it is baffling, because we did have a nice straightforward system where the two thresholds matched. It was very easy to sort of get an idea of what you're going to get taxed at the end of the month. Obviously now now people are coming to you thinking that they can employ someone for, well, in the coming year, £10,600 and not have a PAYE bill, and then you have to remind them about the NI proportion, and suddenly they get a bit upset.
And we've heard a lot about savers. Interest rates have never been lower. Savers, people who rely on their savings for an income, are struggling. Was there anything in the budget that will help them?
Obviously, the personal allowance for interest on savings is going to help a lot of people. Personally, I think it's more to do with pensioners. They'll probably benefit those who've got a private pension, a state pension, and some savings. They're the kind of people who tend to lose the tax on their savings anyway. So for them to get a little bit back is always good. But it's again, it's not really that spectacular.
Laura, a question for you. It's those pensioners again. They're a kind of protected species at the moment. There are all sorts of things that might have happened with TV licenses or with winter fuel payments, but they weren't touched. As Nick says, that there's help for pensioners relying on savings. As someone who's as pretty much the other end of the age spectrum for a wee while, how does this budget help you as a working woman with her own business?
I mean, there are more of us. There are more working women who've set up their own businesses in the last year, especially. You know, it's been a huge growth market. I think it gives you that little bit element of control. I mean, the self-assessment is incredibly time-consuming. The first thing I did when I set up a business was to hire an accountant purely to help me control that. I think a big growth area is going to be people developing technology, making that easier for you to do it online, and linking that in with your expenses and your invoices and that kind of thing. The problem, I mean, I think it's George Osborne wants me to vote for him. I mean, that's really, he wants me to do that, as he wants pensioners to. He wants, creative and digital entrepreneur types to vote for him, and that's great. I'm not going to, but thanks very much. That's brilliant. But for women who run their own business who have young kids, there's nothing there in terms of childcare. There's nothing in terms of children's centres and Sure Start centres. So it's not probably going to make their lives any easier. It's not going to cut their household bills. So I think from a very cynical perspective, you can sit there and go, this is great, a politician is talking directly to me, but I'm a really, really tiny proportion of the employment market.
Question for you, James. There was a lot of talk about the Northern Powerhouse, a lot of talk from the Chancellor about helping the great cities of the north of England, Leeds, Manchester and Liverpool to a degree. This is all good news for an organisation like yours, which has spent decades saying it's time the North got a fairer slice of the cake, a better deal from the South. Surely that kind of direction of travel is a good thing.
The idea of investment in the North is a really good idea. Whether it's actually going to transpire, we didn't really hear much. I think it was a few sentences on the North. It was you mentioned 3 major areas of Manchester, the North East and Yorkshire, almost as if it's I've got to shoehorn these in somewhere. I've got to score a few political points. He shoehorned them in with mentions, obviously, the devolution deal in Manchester, but no significant mention of anything to do with the High Speed 3, connection of the rail from certainly the northeast through to the northwest. That wasn't mentioned. Certainly no talk of investment for any other projects that would significantly help the northwest, as there maybe was last year around certainly the science and tech hubs in the region. So I think there's a question of saying it's a good idea. We welcome investment certainly in the north. It's much needed to break up this north-south divide, but also the drain of resources to the south.
But your General Secretary, Francis O'Grady, was in a big march in London this week, the Homes for Britain March. Yeah. You want more homes built, more, a huge house building programme. No sign of that in the budget, is there?
I think, as we said before, it was a question of what wasn't in this budget, and there was no mention of homes. Other than that, there's seemingly an add-on to Help to Buy, which is only going to inflate the property market more. Certainly in parts of Merseyside, you look at the house price affordability in comparison to wages. We put out a release last year which showed that for the majority of areas, house prices were out of reach of certainly local salaries, and we need the construction of homes, affordable homes for people to buy, but also social housing, and it's something I know the local authorities have talked about, how that might be done and where they might be. There needs to be much more of that to allow social landlords to actually sort of help those people, as you mentioned before. If you're the single person wanting to buy your own home, maybe it looks like a good budget for you, but you're that person in working in local government or the public sector, struggling to get by. Affordable rents only come if you build more homes.
But the Chancellor's message today was that we had a plan, it's working. Labour had a strategy which was to keep banging on about the cost of living, and with inflation falling and unemployment falling and wages rising, although perhaps not as quickly as you would like, where does the Labour Party, which is backed by many of the members of the TUC, where does it go?
Well, I think the cost of living is still an issue. Certainly trade unions have done an awful lot of work in the last 2 to 3 years to talk about cost of living, and we always said that austerity and this idea of austerity and just cutting your way out of trouble wasn't going to bear fruit, and it hasn't. The he says that living standards will be back to 2010 level, but it's based on an entirely different measure than the one that most people use, which is how much people work and how much people earn. And I think what we're still saying is that Britain does need a pay rise, and certainly the North West. Workers in the North West are on average £2,500 a year worse off since 2010. And whatever decisions have been made in budgets, we need a budget that rectifies that, so people do feel better off and can afford things like childcare, can afford to spend a bit more on themselves, but even to help with the everyday things. The only mention we seem to get of food banks today was of a church roof fund, which seems to be the only way that he's only going to help any food banks that are housed in these churches. So, there's still a lot of people that were left out of this budget.
James, lots to chew over there, and we'll be chewing on the budget after this break. Welcome back. I'm Liam Fogarty. This is the Bay TV Liverpool Budget Special. And joining me are three guests: Nick Hughes, an accountant based in Liverpool with Sloan & Co, Laura Brown, communications professional and businesswoman, and James McKenna from the Northwest TUC. Nick, if I could ask you, in the old days, the newspapers would have big headlines about the fact that the duty on beer was being cut, and the duty on betting was frozen, and the duty on tobacco was frozen. Oh, happy days are here again. Do you think people are still impressed by that sort of thing?
No, I don't think so. I think it doesn't sway people the same way as it used to, certainly. It's, again, going back to what I said before, people are far more switched on than as time goes on. They're more interested in every other aspect of life, and they've got their finger on the pulse, so it's not going to really break much water with them, I don't think.
Do you think people still talk about the budget? Are they still kind of glued to the TV, or is it all a bit passé these days?
No, I think they still talk about the budget, but they're really looking at what, absolutely pins them down. What's going to really affect me, and the rest of it's probably ignored. But yeah, the people are still very much aware of it, and no doubt we'll get bombarded with phone calls tomorrow from our clients to find out exactly what it means for them.
Yeah, is that something that happens in the wake of a budget? Is that accountant firms are kind of on 24/7 helpline as your clients come looking for advice?
Thankfully, not quite that bad. Obviously, there's almost always something that will, trigger one of your clients to think, oh, I wonder if that will help me in the way I'm running my business. I don't really think there was an awful lot today which would cause a mad panic tomorrow that they desperately need to speak to any of us. But certainly, we'll get the odd one who will want to know if he can give his staff a pay rise tomorrow.
Laura, you run your own business. What is the biggest favour any chancellor could do people like you who are running small businesses, striving to kind of make ends meet, maybe as a sole trader or as part of a very small group?
I think really every small business is different. I think from working in Baltic Creative, what we have seen works, and we've seen it works because they're replicating it now in Manchester and Leeds with this, is clusters work and collaborations work, and people sharing ideas. What makes that easier is improved infrastructure and improved travel, so that it's easier to get from one place to another. If there is a really successful incubator space in Manchester, I'm going to be wanting to go with my mates to go over there, and we'll go and share ideas. We'll bring, Does Liverpool over there, we'll bring Ironbird, and we'll be able to share our expertise. We're very focused in, creative and digital in Liverpool. It's very much in TV, it's very much in film, it's very much in web development and, PHP and coding and all that kind of thing, and the Internet of Things, whereas Manchester's seen as a bit more creative, a bit more, advertising. Being able to provide that balance will be really important.
But James, a question for you, which is kind of related to what Laura's saying. This Chancellor, George Osborne, has made a huge song and dance about improving infrastructure, not just broadband speeds and all that sort of thing, but actual physical infrastructure between cities. And we heard, as you say, a lot of talk about the link between Manchester and Leeds, not so much about Liverpool and the city region. Are we kind of getting left in the starting blocks?
Well, I think that's the danger, and that's something we've talked about certainly in the past when George Osborne and David Cameron came up to the north, as they like to describe it, like they've come to a foreign country. They came up and they talked about the rail links, but look how long it takes to get to Manchester from Liverpool. We've got a fantastic railway station there, Lime Street, but the connections to other parts of the country, particularly to a city that is just down the road, you know, a very stark, you know, it's seen as a fantastic achievement that we've now got a train that can take 30 minutes to get there. You know, it is quicker to drive for a lot of people, but the motorway becomes...
Or it's easier to go down to London rather than going to Sheffield.
Well, it's as quick, and there's no need for people to try and, you know, join up with those other successful cities. And I think there is a danger that, you know, for someone so close to us, like Manchester, we could be left behind because of a lack of investment in infrastructure in the city that maybe creates jobs and helps industries grow even more, or into joining up with the others in Manchester or in part of Yorkshire.
But the Chancellor and indeed the Prime Minister have been, you know, taking lots of opportunities to say, yes, you know, we want to embrace the North, we want to kind of improve the North and improve its connections. Are you saying they're not genuine?
I'm not saying that maybe their intention or their idea isn't genuine. How far they're going, or it you know, certainly leaves question marks about what they can actually achieve. But also, I think for many people, it's a bit of you know, it's a little bit too late. Certainly from this current government, but also, you know, it needs a grander vision for linking up, you know, certainly the big cities in the north. But I think having a vision for cities like Liverpool, because, you know, this talk of devolution can mean a lot for cities like Manchester, but, you know, are we really going to see the same devolution in Liverpool with Manchester just down the road? Are they going to be the big person in the northwest? Are we going to have 2 or 3 big northern cities? And, you know, the likes of Liverpool and Sheffield and others are just going to have to scrap around the edges, and that wouldn't help the likes of Laura. It wouldn't help maybe industries who want to come here to create jobs. You know, we should be encouraging big industries, we should be encouraging big employers to want to locate to the Liverpool City region to bring in jobs that maybe then Laura and others can support, you know, with their industry, and, you know, more work for accountants when people locate up here. But, you know, if we don't have that infrastructure and that investment in the city region, you know, it doesn't encourage people to come here and provide that in the first place.
But we're talking huge sums of money. We know they're huge, you know, 40 billion for HS2, maybe half as much again for HS3, the link between the northern cities, east-west, as it were. But to do that, you need a healthy economy. And what the Chancellor today said was that they're going to be able to bring down the deficit, we're going to pay our way in the world. And yet, not that long after he'd sat down, there were forecasts coming through from very respected organisations saying, actually, it's going to be cuts and cuts and more cuts over the next 2 or 3 years. What are your members going to do about that?
Oh, well, it's going to cost jobs. There was a very curious but interesting line from George Osborne today, who said that they'd reduced the administrative expenses of central government by 40%. What he means is public services. He doesn't mean, you know, that they've stopped ordering that very expensive paper and the very expensive pens. He means that they've cut jobs. And what that means in the region is that there's less people spending money. There's less people maybe visiting the Baltic Creative to visit the cafes and restaurants and the night, you know, the nighttime economy in those areas. And that, you know, has a knock-on effect to many people. It's not just one person working in a job centre or working in a hospital who loses the job or, you know, suffers a pay freeze. It has a wider implication to working families and to the wider economy. And, you know, what we're seeing today is potentially more pain. A very sharp increase, it would seem, in the next 3 years is the projection.
Well, Nick, one of the specifics was that the welfare budget would fall by about 3 billion a year. Now, it was unclear whether that would fall because the economy was improving or it would fall because the payments were going to be smaller. I don't know whether you and your colleagues in the accountancy trade kind of have much interaction with people who are on benefits or people who depend on social security or welfare. Does the kind of squeeze on welfare affect people who are in work and people perhaps who might want to employ the services of someone like yourself?
Absolutely. There's still, you know, there's plenty of people who are, you know, who are applying for tax credits or other sorts of benefits who also are self-employed and you know, are in need of an accountant. And you know, it's becoming harder for them to sort of manage generally because the pounds don't go as far as they want them to. So every little bit helps. So you know, if there is an opportunity for you know, one of our clients to apply for tax credits, we're sort of duty bound to sort of say to them, well, you know, if you are struggling, you do meet the correct criteria to apply for something like this.
Because people don't think of tax credits as welfare, do they?
No, they don't. But that's exactly what it is.
When you kind of look through the books of like a small or medium-sized enterprise, are you able to identify where they're kind of cutting back on the wage bill, reducing the payroll? And if you are, how are things? Are we actually coming out of that period where nearly everybody either had their pay frozen or cut? Are things looking a little rosier?
It's up and down. I mean, we actively run a sort of a payroll bureau for our clients anyway. So because a a lot of people, again, the part of the reason why I don't think we'll lose too many tax returns is people are frightened of making a mess of these things, even though they're deemed as being quite simple. We run a lot of payroll calculations for a lot of our clients. So we're seeing that people are cutting back. It just depends on the sector, really. For example, you can guarantee that pubs and clubs are keeping their staffing to a bare minimum where possible, because there's not as many people going out and drinking, and I don't think that today's freeze on beer, or rather 1 pence reduction on beer prices is going to go a long way to change that.
Laura, you work in a sector which is notorious for forcing its employees to live off fresh air. People in the kind of creative sector and people in the arts and in graphic design and computer work and all that sort of thing. Was there anything at all that the Chancellor said that allowed you a kind of scintilla of optimism that your sector would be able to grow and improve thanks to a measure in the budget?
They're talking about it. I mean, creative and digital employees, I think it's 170,000 people across the north of England. And it's a growing sector, and it's everything from films to gaming, and it's huge. And they're talking about it, and that's massive. From when I started it Fact almost a decade ago.
Very quickly.
And that was people weren't really talking about it then. It was on the fringe. If we're at the heart of the economy, people can see that we might create jobs.
Laura Brown, Nick, James, thank you so much for your time. That's been the BTV Liverpool Budget Special.